All right. I'm just going to prepare everybody. We have 4 topics to discuss under the governance portion of this work session, and I ordered it based on what I hope would be the simplest, easiest to move on, and saving the other more challenging topics to the end. So the first one being the role of meeting managers. It was during the board's July retreat that the issue of meeting managers was raised, and the key areas during that July retreat, to refresh your memory, was that we needed to allow more time for board discussion on the topics, that we wanted executive summaries of the full report, but then provide that balance for board members to be able to really have dialogue before taking any action. In terms of the importance of balancing board members contacting the meeting managers with their concerns and expectations versus the meeting managers needing to do the outreach, and therefore looking at how we could make these types of adjustments through the governance manual. When the governance committee discussed it, and Ms. Mulberg, you're bringing up the original, right? Okay, so the original meeting manager, this is what we currently have in our strategic governance manual. Unfortunately, this is just the original one. We don't have a red line that shows then what all of the changes were we were going to need. But I will let you know that what the board focused on was, if we scroll down to item number 5 and number 6, but it's the red line version was the red line of the most recent changes that governance made. It doesn't include every single change. I know. So just looking at that, I wanted to just draw your attention to, we tackled number 5, number 6, and number 8. And then ended up in the red line version that was posted, you will see it was some of our fine tuning of changes in those 5 areas. In terms of number 5, where it said meeting managers should contact the chair to advise if there are any concerns, particularly the time set aside for each agenda item 3 weeks in advance. The only real change we made is that we dropped off the 3 weeks in advance because, as most of us know, as meeting managers, we don't meet with staff and review the materials until typically the week before the work session. So we just thought it was important to be more clear about what we're doing. So number 5, as you will see, just simply says contact the chair as soon as possible to advise of any concerns, including the time set aside for each agenda. And then number 6 was quite lengthy, and we felt that it was, again, trying to look at what would be realistic in terms of where the communication comes from. And so you will see in your red line version, we really streamlined number 6 and just simply brought it down to meeting managers should work with appropriate staff to have the objective or the outcomes expected for the agenda, and have that posted on the board docs cover page summary, so that whether you're a board member, you're a member of the public, you understand when you go to that coverage page summary that is posted on board docs, what is it that we're actually going to discuss, what's the why. And then in terms of looking at the other changes that we made to section 8, again, we felt 8C. I would prefer we go to the red line version now rather than create some confusion. So if you go down to 8, A through E, mostly what we were trying to, again, delineate is how do we handle next steps. And have that guidance in the strategic manual, because even though I think we've been pleased with how we're doing as this existing board on this, we thought it was important to have it in governance manual, because as boards change, that approach could change. So this is, at least for now, what we're recommending based on the board's work and from the governance committee's dialogue, that we felt that this would be the best way to capture what the board's been doing since we all became seated together a little over a year ago. So this was reviewed by the full governance committee, which includes myself, Bill Young-Moon, Dahlia Palchek, and Tom Wilson, and it has the support of the governance committee, these changes to meeting manager roles and responsibilities. So with that, I will open up for any comments. Ms. Hines?
Sure, yeah. So, and I'm sorry, I stepped in a little bit late. What is our goal tonight? Are we, as a board, if we give a thumbs up to these changes, then where does it go from there?
It would just, we would be updating the strategic governance manual with these changes.
Okay, on a show of hands tonight?
Yes.
Is that how we do this? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So just a couple of questions. Thank you for tackling this, governance committee. Just a couple of things I see. And I can see that you tried to make changes that just reflect the reality of what we've been doing. But so taking out the role of meeting managers to, call around to other school board members and, talk about what's coming up in the work session and all of that. I think it's true that we mostly have not been doing that, but I just want us to think about and maybe talk about a little bit about whether we really want to punt that, or whether we want to put it in there as a recommendation and keep it, or are we really ready to just say meeting managers don't have an obligation to, and I think that was in the old number 5, right? Was no, not number 5. Where is it? It's number 6, right? Meeting managers should develop a communication plan, the old one, for contacting board members as soon as the work session material is posted to board docs, which should be 10 days before work session. Meeting managers should contact all board members prior to the meeting to solicit questions and concerns. Additionally, should advise board members of the objective or outcome expected for the agenda item. I hear that governance would like us to just take that out as something we don't do, but I'd like us to talk about it a little bit, of whether we all agree with that.
Ms. Hines, I'm really glad you brought this up, because we might need Ms. Mulberg to help me understand what's happened in some of these revisions. I'm looking at our notes from the governance committee on November 10th, and number 6 actually did have new language that said that meeting managers should advise board members via email of the objectives or outcomes expected for the agenda, which should also then be posted on the board docs cover sheet in key points and recommend action. So one of the things we did talk about in there is, if we revise this so board members aren't calling every single board member to say, hey, I'm the meeting manager, wanted to see if you have any questions. That's sort of labor intensive. We would at least send an email saying, we're the meeting managers, here's what we're going to be discussing, here's sort of the focal point of the work we're going to be doing next week. Let us know if you have any questions. And in fact, since Dahlia Palchek and I are the meeting managers for next Monday, we met with staff today, and we're drafting an email to all of you tomorrow. So I'm not sure why that's not captured here. I think there might, I'll be honest with you, Ms. Hines, I understood them being two different needs. One is having clear objectives, so for the public and or the board to go look at that, and for staff to help delineate that. But I still had the understanding that we would be communicating with all of you as meeting managers in email to kind of set expectations, and I still would advocate for that. I did not realize we dropped that language out, and I would support us making sure we add that back in.
All right, so are we okay with, if other board members would like to chime in on that, I'd like to hear your thoughts, if that's okay. Thanks.
Yep. And so, Ms. Hines, other than perhaps adding that language back in number 6, so we're capturing some way for the meeting managers to communicate with board members, and by email, you would be fine with that?
I would probably say by email or phone. Just
Okay.
because some people
Depending on how
prefer-
meeting managers want to accomplish it.
Right, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Sorry, but the old language did not say specifically by phone, if I'm correct, right? So it just says contacting, right? So can we just leave it? If that's what people want. I do think we had made the decision to change it and have it be on the objectives. So if we want to go back, I think we don't need to get too gritty.
Okay, so let me start looking at where people are. All right. Ms. Evans, were you next? And then followed by Mr. Moon and Cora Sanders. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Pat that is an important function of the meeting managers. And I know we don't always do it, but I think that it's worthy of both a reminder that we're supposed to do that, and particularly, what our goal is for each item, so we have that firmly in our minds. So I would like to see the language that was in there, if we could put that up, because from what you read, Megan, it sounded like it was a reasonable way to put it. So if we could see that, I think I can support what you just read, but I'd like to see it in writing. Then the only other thing that I had was down at the very end with 8E, that if the agenda item needs further board deliberation, the board will decide if the meeting managers will continue to facilitate. What we've started to do is that the hold work session, the same meeting managers are managing the hold work session. And of course, also, if it's, for example, if it's a governance, then it's the governance chair that does it. If it's budget, it's budget chair. I don't think that last item is needed, because, and I don't know that the board would want to sit at the end of a meeting and say the same managers will be the managers. I think either it should just be left to what's already determined, to be the meeting managers, or leave it to the chair.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. So what I'm thinking for that language would be, if the agenda item needs further deliberation, then the existing managers will continue to facilitate this at the next work session, because you could be the budget meeting manager, you could be the governance meeting manager, or you could be just the work session meeting manager. So in other words, you're saying whoever's managing and facilitating that continues it. So for example, like if we don't finish the governance, if we have something tonight that governance is going to need to bring back, obviously just be governance bringing it back.
And that's what I'm saying, that you would already be the meeting manager, so that decision wouldn't have to be made one way or the other. Although ERFC was left to budget, so it would be the budget, it would be budget again that would do it.
You're
And I
saying
would-
that, right, it should not be
I
the
just don't think
same.
it's needed.
Right.
I don't think we need that last
It's going to be rare that we have an actual topic that you're not either one of the committee chairs, that it might come back. And at that
Right.
point, we could tackle it as needed.
Yeah, I just don't think, because otherwise then we're.
So just delete.
I think just delete E.
Delete E.
Yeah.
Okay.
That'd
Thank
be my
you
recommendation if
Thank
others
you.
support that.
for that input. All right, Mr. Moon?
Okay, going back to Ms. Hines' advocacy regarding putting the language back in section number 5. No, section number.
It was number 6.
Number 6. Yes, number 6. I think I might have been one of the committee members who suggested deleting some of the languages, because I wanted to just the language to reflect the reality that we don't contact, send, but by making sure that meeting managers working with the staff on the board doc post objectives we are seeking, and I should assume, I should expect all board members read the agenda, which is like the first thing you see when you go to a work session item, and by asking meeting managers to contact board members to again and say, please read your materials and go to your board doc and read that. I don't know whether that is needed, but if the language can be changed to say that meeting managers are encouraged to contact, I can live with that. But but if language sort of mandates meeting manager to do it, I don't think that extra email or phone call is actually needed.
I appreciate that input because one of the things in governance, since we talk a lot about the language in our strategic governance manual, is a focus on what we encourage, what's the guidance piece. So, Mr. Moon, your language of meeting managers are encouraged, it's just good guidance, and then board members can make the decision. So I appreciate that nuance that you're suggesting. Ms. Corbett-Sanders?
Mr. Moon and Ms. Hines' comments on this. What I was going to suggest is try to bring it all together and say that in your email, that after the meeting managers meet with the staff, that you all suggested possibly sending out an email, and the email could be used as a way of identifying any areas that you want the board to pay particular attention to. So, for example, I agree with you, Mr. Moon, that all board members should read all of the materials on board docs. Sometimes they'll do a quick scan through the whole thing and not catch certain items. So if there are areas that have been raised in the prep session that you think need particular attention, those should just be highlighted in the cover email.
Well, I'll accept, encouraged to do it. Not sure that I would actually do it, but I would be encouraged to do it.
And I appreciate that nuance, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, because I know Ms. Palchuk and I, when we had our work session today with staff, if you were to look at the upcoming work session next Monday on the CIP, I mean, it's a work session on the CIP, but we had a really great discussion over the course of an hour of how do you wrap your arms around a board discussion on the dense CIP. Well, staff has spent time talking with individual board members, so there's just areas of focus that the meeting managers could decide. We want to just give you a heads up. And so that's why I do still support having something there. Is there anyone else who would like to weigh in on this? All right, so at this point then, there has been some suggestion to restore a language in number 6. Do we have anything typed up? If you could bring that up. You would want to lead off with where it is in the black ink first, and the red line, I think, should come afterwards. So it's, kind of part 1 and part 2 of number 6. I guess when I think of contact, I think about calling. When I communicate, might just then allow people to realize that could be an email or conversation, so that might. All right, everybody okay with that? All right, is there anything else that we didn't touch on based on Ms. Evans said delete E, and then we made the change to 6. Is there anything else before I ask for a vote on these changes to the governance manual? Okay, with that said, can I see a show of hands of support for this? Excellent, thank you. All right, that one is done. All right, the second item as shown on board docs, and I would just say, Ms. Mulberg, maybe in the future for this printed agenda that's at the board members' seats, it might be helpful that we would go ahead and include the detail that we listed on board docs, because I think it'd be helpful that board members are seeing what I'm seeing, which is there's 4 items that we were going to talk about today, and then there was 4 attachments. So the next one has to do with advocacy letters, and this again came to governance from a forum topic, and after much discussion, what I wanted to sort of highlight for everybody to see is this would be new guidance in the governance manual. The key thing that the governance committee talked about is that it is strictly guidance. Nothing, requires board members to adhere to this, but we think this would be sort of a model of best practice on how we might approach something in the following situations. And as you see below, there can be, if the board has not taken a formal position on the issue in question that you're going to advocate on, here would be some guidance. If the board has already taken a formal position on the issue of question, here's some guidance. And I'll draw your attention to that. Number one, we felt that ideally board members should make every attempt to provide at least 48 hours of advance notice to their colleagues when requesting signatures of support for an advocacy letter. Again, you could get a call from Richmond saying, hey, the education subcommittee is doing something and the board hasn't had enough time to review it, but I'm just calling around to get signatures because I think this is really important. I mean, that's, again, every board member has that right and opportunity. The key piece, though, is in the next section below, and this was from advice of our general counsel. You'll see in quotes that if there's not been a formal position and you're going to use either individual letterhead or school board letterhead, and I'll get to part B on this conversation, which is individual letterhead, we do believe that the following statement is needed as a disclaimer so that the reader understands that, this is coming, even though it doesn't, this is speaking for the board members involved in the letter, not necessarily the full board as a whole. So that's sort of part A of what this advocacy letter is trying to lay out. And then the next thing that we wanted to capture in this guidance was the individual letterhead. So if you could pull that up. We asked the clerk of the board to survey the board of supervisors. What do they do in issuing public letters, whether it's an advocacy letter or something that hasn't necessarily come and received the blessings of the full board of supervisors? And so posted on board docs, but I have copies that I'll just hold up here. You will see these are 6 different letterheads that the individual board of supervisors have created, and they're all slightly different based on their own taste and interest. I'll just drop one. Jeff McKay's got 3 different images on there, and then you've got Supervisor Pat Harity that just has the county seal on it. So you can customize it as you want to. This doesn't create a real direct cost to the school system because, again, this is all done electronically. But we asked for this so you could see what they look like, and the goal being that when board members, again, would like to send an advocacy letter, one ideal way of delineating that this is coming from you is it's on your own letterhead. You, again, can still use the school board's letterhead, especially if you're going to send an advocacy letter that might have multiple board members on it. So you don't want Megan McLaughlin's letterhead, but it's got 3 or 4 of the undersigned on it, because it suddenly creates it. So why is it her letterhead versus Janie Strauss's letterhead if there's several of us on it? So those options exist. The takeaway then that the governance committee is asking those of you here tonight is looking at this language, we feel that it comes with good guidance from our division council on the fact that board members speaking and advocating publicly on something that isn't necessarily a board position. And number 2, then on what letterhead would you use? And then I guess I want to stop there because there's going to be one more piece to this, and I'm afraid of complicating it too much. So let's start with those parts there. And I have Ms. Hines, and then I have Ms. Evans, and is there anybody else in the queue? Okay.
Okay, thank you. I like the idea of the individual letterhead. I think that's, I think we should have it. My question is on the other document, the new school board advocacy letters guidance for strategic governance, right? And it's number 4 on there. My only question is why the the language in quotes says the views expressed herein may not represent the views of the school board. I think if someone is writing a letter dissenting from the board's adopted position, isn't it more accurate to say the views expressed herein do not represent the views of the Fairfax County School Board? Can we make that change, or I don't know?
I wish John Foster were, oh, there you are. Sorry, John. I kept looking for you behind me to the right. So, John, thank you. Yay, you're here. Could you respond?
Yeah, I think that the proposed change that Ms. Hines is raising, I wouldn't oppose it. I think that she raises a good point, which is this is in 4, so this is where the board has taken a formal position. And if there is a formal position that's been taken, if there is a letter that's dissenting from that position, then do not represent the views may be a more accurate statement than may not.
I just think it's more transparent for the community. So
I appreciate you catching that. When we were drafting this, one of the things we talked about was trying to have as much consistency in the disclaimer. But you're absolutely correct, because that is a different section in there. I think that's a really good revision. And for those following behind Ms. Hines, if you can, please note if you support that edit, that would be helpful to me as well. I have Ms. Evans, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, Ms. Strauss.
Well, I was going to make the same point, but I actually wonder if we shouldn't make it even stronger. If somebody is writing an advocacy letter that runs directly counter to a school board position, I wonder if it shouldn't state that, as opposed to just saying it doesn't represent the views of the Fairfax County School Board. That may sound, that could be read as, well, the school board hasn't taken a position on it. So I would prefer if it really is directly counter to a stated FCPS school board position, I think it should be stated as such. Yes, that the views expressed herein are a minority view or are a dissent from the expressed position of the school board. I mean, I'm struggling with the exact wording, but I think it needs to be clear. The only other, I have a small other suggestion on 2. I think maybe the word only should be taken out. The views of the, it represents the views of the undersigned and may not represent blah, blah, blah. I don't know that you need only, because others on the board may also support it. But
Ms. Evans, I apologize. I'm trying to create notes based on suggested edits. So where exactly are you right there? On number 2?
On 2, yeah. I think take out the word only.
Okay.
I mean, that would be a simple one if people agree to it. But I would welcome some help in fashioning the proper
Number 4.
for 4.
Okay.
Yeah. But I do think it needs to state that if it runs counter.
Just a second. Trying to cue the cats. Okay, hold on real quickly. So, Ms. Evans, is there anything else you want to contribute to suggested edits? Okay, before Ms. Corbett-Sanders, Ms. Mulberg, you wanted to say something? Okay, so, right now, we've got Ms. Hines and Ms. Evans suggested edits in red. And then I do understand, Ms. Evans, you're saying stronger edits to number 4, and Ms. Corbett-Sanders, you've indicated you might actually have a suggestion to that end, and you are next in the queue anyway, so go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for the Governance Committee for taking this on. I think it's an excellent idea to go ahead and have individualized letterhead. It's particularly important for those that are, I send letters to kids who have done, who have excelled in certain areas and like to recognize it. So it makes more sense to have personalized letterhead.
But I just want to make sure it doesn't send a panic to anybody watching or listening or board members. You are still always welcome to use the full school board letterhead if you want to.
Currently, that's the only, today we only have the full
And you
letterhead.
like the idea
so
of
I
the
like
option.
the idea of the
The
option. The second, I welcome the removal of the word only. I think that makes sense. And in addressing point 4, may I suggest that it says the views expressed herein do not represent the policy or the decision taken by the Fairfax County School Board on this issue, and then reference the actual policy that we're talking about, because this is only after we have taken a formal position. So it would give the reader the opportunity to look to what the actual position is.
So the views expressed herein do not represent, I would like to keep it a little more streamlined. I was writing
decision
the
taken
official
by-
position. I think it's the official position.
Okay,
I
the
mean,
official
'cause
position.
it's these are advocacy letters, so it just says, do not represent the official position taken by.
Right. The Fairfax County School Board, and ideally, we'll have a reference to what that official position is so that the reader can go look at it.
I think at minimum, this language is important. This is the disclaimer we're talking about.
Right.
Whether or not then board members, before they send off their advocacy letters, have to go find the link or reference to the date and the time. This is, the bottom line is you're just making it clear, it does not represent the official position of the board, because we took a formal position, and that's the category. So I think that's a good suggested edit for us to consider with today's discussion. Is there anything else, Ms. Corbett-Sanders? Okay, Ms. Strauss?
Thank you. I support the edit so far. And Mr. Foster, I have a question for you. Years and years ago, Tom Cawley would explain that under Virginia Code, individual board members do not have power. We only have power as a body, as we meet as a body. And I do remember, discussions on individual advocacy. I think that what's proposed here makes it cleaner, and I know a lot of board members would be very comfortable, would like the opportunity to be able to do this. But my question is, in your understanding of the Virginia Code and the meaning of individual board members do not have power in and of themselves, but only as a corporate body in a public meeting.
That is correct. Under Virginia law, the school board, and we discussed this some this morning in governance committee, the school board is a body corporate.
Right.
And it acts as a body.
Right.
And so individual members cannot purport to act on behalf of or enact policy on behalf of the board as a whole. Having said that, there's no legal prohibition on individual board members having letterhead and issuing individual letters that state their personal position or views on things.
Okay.
But just to complete the point, those statements are not legally binding on the board or on FCPS.
Right. We cannot individually direct staff other than a corporate decision to direct the
That is
superintendent.
correct.
Okay, I just wanted to, so that was always my understanding, and I wanted to make sure the laws hadn't changed.
No.
So people still have, obviously, their First Amendment rights of opinion and speaking out. And so this does not run counter in any way to what is legally permissible in Virginia.
Absolutely not.
Great. Okay, thank you.
And I appreciate, Ms. Strauss, you bringing that, clarification, making sure we are conforming with Virginia Code. Because the Board of Supervisors are also elected individuals who serve on a corporate body, their having individual letterhead certainly was an indication to us that having individual letterhead is acceptable. How you use it and what you say and what you believe your voice or power of authority is got to be clearly understood.
Right, and I guess then my next piece, we are also precluded under Virginia Code to use public money, FCPS money, for a certain amount of, obviously, no political activity. And then the question is advocacy or, that was always, is a careful line that we have to walk.
So I think, Mr.
So again, let me go back.
Okay.
So advocacy, prior to a school board decision, going to the community to get support one way or another. We're not Congress. And so that's always, in the use of advocacy letters, as we go through our budget year, would it be appropriate or inappropriate for a block or a grouping or individual board members to advocate for or against certain parts of the budget through a letter writing, Twitter campaign, what have you? My sense would be no, we couldn't do that, but
Yeah, that is, as we all know, the budget is probably one of the most, if not the most sensitive issue that this board has to work with on an annual basis. And so I would like Ms. Strauss to look into that particular issue and get back to the board with guidance on whether you're going to be able legally on the budget, because that is really in some ways kind of its own unique issue and important issue. I think as a more general matter, putting aside the budget question, I think as a more general matter, certainly, because we looked at this and working through these proposed policies, individual members certainly do have a First Amendment right to state their positions on issues. But I do want to close the loop on the budget issue and certainly can report out to the board once I'm done with that.
because the question would be doing, whipping up a public campaign one way or another, whatever it is. Because I've always been told, well, we go out and speak and, ask for money and what do you think about this? The way in which Congress will use their own franking privilege in certain ways. I believe we cannot do that, but that is my question. We're not like Congress.
So, Ms. Strauss, following along on your input, which I think is very important, when the Governance Committee reviewed this, again, coming out of the forum, it was based on just individual school board letters to perhaps like the Virginia High School
Right,
League
got it.
or to the General Assembly. But you raise an important distinction here, which is if we're not clear with this strategic governance language, one could read this and say, then a board member could send an advocacy letter to their magisterial district or even countywide saying, I'm advocating for the following as a way of soliciting public and influencing public opinion. So I'm wondering, Mr. Foster, if we might have to have a little more clarity that it's school board advocacy letters to whom? If it's to the public, then that's, again, you could certainly, send, keep in touch messages, communications as you want to, but whether this would be an example of, let's say, the meals tax proposal, pro or con, would we want to watch the 12 of us start sending out, and take Braddock District, I could have 50,000 or more households that I'm going to send an advocacy letter to, and the mailing cost and all of that, as opposed to, or even if I sent an e-letter and an email, through a keep in touch, I'm still using the school system's resources to advocate for a position that does not actually relate to my board responsibilities.
Well, that's right.
It becomes political because the meals
That's right.
tax is on the ballot. So I don't know if we maybe need to have additional guidance in this that's going to talk about when these advocacy letters can be issued. In other words, I think there obviously, in the 5 years I've been on the board, I've been verbally told this is how you can or cannot use your role, Megan, and the school's resources. But I think, Ms. Strauss, and please correct me if I've captured this, this guidance, however well-intentioned, may need to incorporate some of the understood but not written explicitly in our governance manual about what it
Right.
means.
We need to understand under the Virginia Code what we can and cannot do, because there are constraints for school boards in Virginia, and so that we don't cross the line.
So that is something I need for everybody to be thinking about, because as excited as I was that this would be maybe another thing we could move off the governance's plate, I do think it's really important that everybody weigh in today. If we're not ready yet or new things have come up, the Governance Committee will gladly take this back. So, Ms. Strauss, anything else right now?
No, other than greater clarity to make sure that we stay within the box the state has designed for us.
Okay, thank you so much. And Mr. Moon, you're next, and Ms. Evans, I have you for a go back.
I left the governance committee meeting a little early today, and I told Madam Governance Chair that I would not oppose their recommendation. Came to the full board, but I had some concerns, and I had shared that with Mrs. McLaughlin. But having heard what the board members have said about this particular, I'm going to share my thought on this with you. I will be able to support the language changes being proposed up there, that's redlined. If you look at one other section in the governance manual, it's a code of conduct of board members. There's a section which says board members will respect the decisions of the full board. People may have a different interpretation on respect. What does that mean? I may have my own practice. Once the decision is made by the full board, I would really hesitate. I would probably find myself, if I did it, very rare, few occasions, to go out and advocate something against the decisions that's been already made by the full board, because again, school board as a body corporate. That if you have a disagreement, you present it at the board meeting, and if the majority overrules your thought, so be it. You need to respect the decisions. You don't want to do anything to undermine the decisions made by the full board. So advocacy letter, contrary to the decisions made by the full board, in my mind, will go directly against this. At the same time, I also believe in First Amendment right of us as individually elected school board members. We're not elected as a body corporate. We become part of the body corporate after being elected individually. And individual board members probably in his or her own right, feel duty-bound to advocate or preach what he or she believes the constituents demand or conscience demands. So in that case, individuals should also be given a right to advocate to a limited extent. I mean, I would hate for school board members to use school system's resources to advocate something that is contrary to the decisions made by the full board. So if you want to advocate for myself something that is against the decisions by the full board, for me, I would probably use my own resources, my own letterhead, not school boards, well, individual school board members' letterhead, my own time, my own postage, my own email to do it, rather than having school board staff, school board stationery, school board letterhead to do it. But I'm not prepared to go into that kind of a detail in that, because I may be in an extreme case of being cautious.
So
That's what I am.
Thank
but
you, Mr.
I can
Moon.
support that.
Okay, so just to capture your input, one of the things that I really appreciate you bringing to our attention is that there is a separate section within Strategic Governance Manual, Code of Conduct, that in this proposed draft of advocacy letters guidance, we could at the bottom reference, please see page something where, page 31, school board member code of conduct as a related guidance for this. Would that sort of capture what you're talking about in terms of, rather than having this one suddenly pile on, it's more of this accompanies it to provide additional guidance as needed?
That would be helpful.
Okay. All right. I would support that as well. Before I go to go-backs, Mr. Wilson, I apologize. I typically try to go to my governance committee colleagues to speak first, so here you go.
No apology necessary, Ms. McLaughlin. You're doing a great job. So I'm really intrigued by Ms. Strauss's thoughts on this, and I guess my thought is that I think it's clear we do need to take this back to the governance committee and understand, what rights and obligations board members have in terms of advocacy letters and reaching out to constituents and because I think that if the answer is, well, resources can be used to advocate in support of a board decision only, then there's a risk that significant constituents aren't able to get their voice heard through their elected representative. And so I think it does require more thought and consideration, and I think we should be careful as we consider that issue in terms of drafting guidance for board members. And I appreciate Mr. Moon pointing out that we have a code of conduct page in the governance manual that obviously we're already trying to comply with in all of our actions. So that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I'll reserve suggested approach to what you've said after everyone else had a chance for go-backs. I now have Ms. Evans, followed by Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
Thank you. And I appreciate what Mr. Moon had to say. That certainly is something to keep in mind, that we do have a code of conduct that says we have to respect the decisions of the board. And I know sometimes you have to walk a fine line there, with respecting the decision if you voted against it or if you disagreed with it. The way the language is there now, it was an improvement. I think it still could be read. Could you pull that up so we can see all of number 4? I still think that it could be read in a variety of ways, that it doesn't represent the official position of the board. What I'm going to suggest is that we just ask people to be very clear and say that it represents a dissent from the official position of the board, and just state that if that's what it is, and I'm looking to my colleagues whether they would support that, but I think that's clearer.
Okay.
Do you agree with that? Yeah. Because that makes it clear that this is an advocacy letter that and the official position is different. And in addition to that, I would support, Ms. McLaughlin, what you had suggested to adding a reference to the school board code of conduct. I think that's a good addition.
Okay. Ms. Corbett-Sanders?
Yes. When I started looking at this, actually just earlier today, I was under the impression that these were individual advocacy letters, not advocacy campaigns. And so I think that maybe that's a distinction that we can make in here, is that, oftentimes you may have a constituent who asks about a particular issue, and this is how you respond if on an issue. I think that we need to make it very clear that it is not appropriate to use school board resources or school system resources to launch a advocacy campaign by sending out letters, bulk mailing and things like that. And so I believe there's clear distinctions given in policy at the state level of how elected officials can use their resources. So maybe that's some guidance we can use. But this, I was under the impression, was focused on individual letters and not campaigns of any sort. And so we might want to just add a clarification.
Thank you for that advocacy. I do think that's a distinction we'll want to incorporate with the board's review of this draft policy. Mr. Wilson, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I pulled up the governance manual as well. Mr. Moon pointed out that yes, in the Code of Conduct 3, B says respect decisions of the board, and 3D actually already provides for board members who want to make their views of dissent and disagreement clear. So we already have some guidance already that actually picks up some of the things we were talking about here in the governance manual. So I'm not sure how long, I mean, I actually, there's really not been a whole lot of occasions where I've thought, in my experience, that this has come up, and maybe we were spending a lot of time negotiating a document that maybe we've already, that our predecessors on the board have already put together and analyzed.
Correct.
Well, so.
So I will just say that in listening to the input everyone has provided, Mr. Foster, I'm wondering, in terms to, I think, what Ms. Strauss has raised and others have echoed support for, if this draft guidance for the strategic manual would incorporate the official language Ms. Strauss talked about, which is, what by Virginia code are we bound to in terms of use of school system resources? Like, in other words, I know I can't send an email out to the Braddock District residents and or even countywide, a KIT message that says, hey, I hope you're all going to go tell the board of supervisors, raise the property tax rate by 4 pennies. That's not allowed. I know it's not allowed, but that is, again, when you're talking about an advocacy letter, helping board members understand anything that would appear to have political advocacy tied to it as opposed to an educational position is what people need to understand, where we can utilize school system resources to communicate an educational position versus to advocate for something that does not relate to the role that we serve. Like, in other words, I don't send a letter on FCPS letterhead to the General Assembly through the FCPS email and school system on my position on pro-choice versus pro-life. It's not education related, and that would be inappropriate. So I think we have guidelines, whether we want to, again, like the code of conduct at the bottom, reference it, where else in the strategic governance manual that we've delineated just so board members have it in written language. Remember, this is what you can use the school system resources for communication and what you cannot. And we could reference that at the bottom too.
Yeah, I think that we could certainly do it that way. Another thing that we could do is simply add a sentence or two once we've completed our research to confirm what's appropriate and what's not as far as advocacy letters are concerned. And, so for example, if the research confirms you can't send advocacy letters to advocate for or against the budget, we would add a sentence to clarify and remind board members of that. So I think once the research is completed, it's a pretty easy and quick fix. And so I'm not concerned about our ability to do that.
Okay. So board members, where I want to, this point, figure out the next steps for the governance committee. We, as you will hear next, have quite a lot on our plate. And so not to, as Tom referenced earlier in the governance committee meeting, get stuck in the mud as we, continue to, hyper review every nuance of every, sentence of anything we're going to get done. I first want to go through the red line edits and just get a show of hands that people are okay with what this is here. Then what I would like to suggest is that Mr. Foster said he could just go find the clarified research on, again, use of resources of what we could do, and perhaps 1 or 2 sentences, make sure that's clear because it's all in the same place. I know we try to not tell people go here and there to go find it, but have it in one place. And then if that's the case, we could, after we get the input from Mr. Foster, get that final change in at the next government update at our work session. I could just say, okay, here we go, everybody. This is the final clean version. Are we good to go? So let me first get this document as close to where it reflects the board's view, and then I'll take your vote on the next step of taking an action on this.
Just to clarify, so once we vote on this, assuming it passes, is it your thought that it would get slipped in the code of conduct portion of the governance manual?
No, Mr. Wilson, thanks for asking the clarifying question. What I saw was we've brought a draft letter of guidance to the board. You guys have helped us get as close to what we think reflects what the board wants. We're now bringing it back to governance because Mr. Foster is going to get us the suggested language that emphasizes use of school system resources when you're going to communicate a position. And then he would bring the draft language to the governance committee. We'd say, yes, add that into the changes that we already did here. And then at the next governance committee update to the board during one of our work sessions, we could just say, okay, here's the final language. And then everybody hopefully goes like this and we're done. So I'm just trying to bring us as far along as possible so we don't keep mashing over this thing. So tonight's vote is only just vote on all the red line changes. Yes or no, do you like them? And then that's our most clear draft until we get the additional change from Mr. Foster, which the governance committee will get to enjoy reviewing and recommending. So to the red line changes up here, can I get a show of hands if you support the suggested changes that have been put up here tonight? Excellent, that's unanimous. So can I get a show of hands that for the next step on this, we will direct our division council to gather the language necessary to reflect, again, through the Virginia Code, what board members are allowed to use school resources to issue an advocacy letter, and we will incorporate that suggested language into this draft guidance. Please raise your hand. Individual advocacy. Well, but it's not always individual. It could be a few board members. Not a mass mailing. Yeah. I think we're going to have that. Yeah, he'll definitely. All right, so then that is good. That is off our plate for now. Okay, quickly on the school board retreat. So I was talking with our clerk of the board, and I said, I've been on the governance committee for a few years now, and I sort of remember we always started having conversations about a February retreat, and then we always do a July retreat. And I said, what happened with that? Because it's January, we haven't talked about it. So it was my understanding that in chairman's meeting, there was some discussion about, based on the fact that we have a superintendent search and also an auditor general search, that there's a lot on the board's plate. So today at governance, we talked about how valuable it might be that in consideration of the board's time, we don't do a full day-and-a-half retreat as currently on hold on our calendar, which is February 24th and 25th. It's a hold, it's there, it's not like we're throwing something at you that you didn't expect. But we could actually give you back time if the board desires to just say, let's either do a Friday evening, team building conversation with the board, because the value of us really being sort of a united team as we embark on two important searches. It might just be some positive, again, breaking bread, and I'm going to suggest some other ideas that came from board members too, but that's kind of what's the driving force here of saying, whether we do an evening meal together, obviously it's public, whether it's in the cafe, we break bread together, we have an opportunity to have a facilitator that helps us just kind of talk about bringing the board together in our shared mission together, especially as we're about to do two important things as a shared effort. And if Friday night people say, I really am not so keen on Friday night, but what about Saturday morning, like a half day? gathering, that's the other possibility, although Ms. Corbett Sanders brought up that the NAACP has a meeting Saturday morning. So that's why the conversation corner led more to the Friday evening. With that said, it could be something as simple as the 12 of us share a meal, and the governance committee could talk about what would that shared meal and conversation and dialogue and team building look like. An additional component was something that was suggested by Ms. Palchuk and had a lot of support from the full governance committee, is would there be perhaps a community service activity we could do in our community together during that time frame, because we were set to start at 3 o'clock. So it could be something like we go to an after-school program. It was also suggested Food for Others has things like packing up meals for the weekend, our weekend backpack meals that are for our needy families. We can engage in that activity and then come back to Gatehouse and break bread and just talk about, again, our shared vision for our school system. So those are kind of the overall suggestions, but most importantly, I think, from the governance committee standpoint, we needed to know, do you all support the idea of at least trying to meet in some capacity in February versus just saying, just take it off and we'll have to revisit another day when we come together. So I would like to get people's thoughts on this. Ms. Hines.
Thank you. So I would propose either we just skip it or we do the evening of the 24th. And if we're going to do a community service project, I like that. I would suggest that it be centrally located and close to Gatehouse. So.
And Ms. Hines, if we were to do a sort of a community service activity, team building activity together, do you support us still coming back to break bread and spend time?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Who else wanted to weigh in? Anybody? Okay. Mr. Moon, thank you.
I will second Ms. Hines' suggestion.
Okay. And anyone else want to weigh in? Ms. Strauss?
I'll do whatever anybody wants, but I have to say now I am not sure that I will end up being available on the 24th.
Okay.
One of my grandchildren's on the jump rope team at Willow Oaks, and they're performing at the Verizon Center. You could go to the Verizon at $100 a ticket. Yes, they're halftime entertainment. It's very competitive at Willow Oaks.
My youngest son was on the jump rope team at Canterbury Woods Elementary, and we used to see him perform halftime at the high schools. No, we just went to go see him at the high school halftime. But it's a wonderful activity, and I'm so proud of our school system for having it, because if you've never seen one, it's really a lot of fun, and it's pretty amazing what these kids accomplish. It's like an after-school club, and it is fantastic. So in terms of, it sounds like there is support for doing a Friday night activity. Ms. Palchuk?
Yeah, sorry if I can wait. I know currently we have it held from 3 to 6, so I think it'd be important to know if we still want it that early, if we would like it a little bit later in the day, if that still works for people, or how early it could be for those who are working.
I think that's important. While I regret that 4 of our colleagues aren't here, the bottom line is it's blocked on their calendar from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. It's the time, again, isn't set in stone right now. So if governance develops a recommendation on how to spend that time, we still have a chance to come back to the full board, and we could build that into any regular business meeting. Just say, from a governance update, hey, everybody, time-wise, or we could even have the EAA send something out and say, please check all the available times that would work for you for this proposed time frame with governance committee, because it might be 3 to 6, it might be 4 to 7.
Sure, I just think we should make that decision soon, because I think people will be making plans. Perhaps they were making dinner plans already, and we don't know about it because it's currently only 3 to 6, so
Right.
we should probably.
And again, it doesn't, because it was 3 to 6, Ms. Palchuk, you bring up a good point. When I said breaking bread for team building, we could certainly, it's not necessarily a full meal at all. People would still have Saturday evening plans, but it's something that we are coming together and having a dialogue, and food is always a good way. So, so Ms. Palchuk, thank you for that input about timing. And Mr. Moon?
So, could we get a consensus on having a freeing Saturday?
Drop Saturday.
Drop Saturday to a Friday if you're going to do some team building activities through some sort of service activity. May I suggest we do that 4 to 6 and then break the bread and have a conversation 6 to maximum 8. So 4 to 8, so that if the board members have other evening activities, they can leave by 8 o'clock. That doesn't have to be a full dinner.
Well, and one of the things that I didn't want to necessarily have the full board weigh in and make a decision tonight, though we could. There were multiple suggestions at the governance meeting today. Yes, one of them was to do a service activity and then come back together because it would be team building. A suggestion I brought to the table is for those of you, and I think most of us were there with the board of supervisors, Karen Cleveland, who is with Leadership Fairfax, she was the facilitator and the moderator at our joint retreat, and she did a really great job, I believe, in sort of setting a tone for the shared conversation. And one of the things that she and I talked about afterwards during the wine and cheese reception was just, how do we continue as a board to cultivate our shared relationships with each other? And so I was kind of envisioning that with a short window of 3 to 6 p.m., it was more about breaking bread and having conversation with one another for maybe 45 minutes or so, but then 2 hours and 15 minutes, she would be talking about, how do we embark on these next 2 searches in a way that we're in a good place with one another. And I was actually hoping for more of that sort of positive dialogue where we focus on the things that we have in common with one another. And so the governance committee didn't necessarily say this 3-hour window was going to be dedicated to a service activity. We might even decide that that's what we want to do with our July retreat when we have more time. So I do think that is a piece of what the governance committee can still go back and discuss, but it might be helpful to find out, do people want to be able to have that dialogue with one another to get us all in a positive, in the same place before we embark on 2 big searches, or do we just want to do a service activity and break bread?
Could we just say, at this point, since we're not all here and we are, 40 minutes late for our closed meeting, that I feel comfortable saying free up Saturday for everybody, 4 to 8 on Friday, governance come back to us with a plan.
All right, based on Mr. Moon and Ms. Hines' advocacy for that, can I see a show of hands if, okay, Ms. Corbett Sanders, was there something you wanted to add before we vote? Okay.
I think that we should free up Saturday. I don't think governance is meeting between, you may have one meeting between now and the scheduled date. So may I suggest that tonight we just make a decision of whether or not we are going to focus purely on breaking bread together on that evening, or if what the best solution would be to say we are going to have an evening function or an afternoon evening function, which will include a service activity and dinner, and we have the EAs work together to identify a date in a period of February, because we've heard from Janie, she's not able. We don't know if there are others that aren't able to attend on that evening. And if we have a group this size for that evening, then I'm concerned that we will have, it's counterproductive or counter to what you're trying to achieve. And so use our EAs to, ask for their help in identifying a date that works for everybody.
I very much appreciate what you're saying. The reason that we set a calendar and we put holds on our calendars is because it's the only way to rein in 12 people. So I hear what you're saying. I regret if Ms. Strauss can't join us, but, and we do say, I mean, I've been on the board now 5 years going into my 6th. It's always been said, ideally, when we're talking about retreats, do everything you can not to have a conflict. Life happens. I had my 30th high school reunion. I missed the retreat, and it was an important life choice for me. Ms. Strauss making a decision for her grandchild, I fully respect that. It's totally okay. We're not going to always get all 12, but I don't support
My
that.
concern is that we're extending it beyond 6 o'clock to go to 8 o'clock, which means that you may actually lose people. If it were just 3 to 6, because that's what's currently on the calendar, that's my only concern is, do we need to survey that people can actually add that extra 2
All right,
hours?
so I would recommend that the governance committee follow what was on our calendar, which is 3 to 6. And if the governance committee, based on Ms. Hines' recommendation and Mr. Moon is supporting it, let's go with what's outlined in the Friday timeline. If we come back with a plan that says, could we inch this back to 7 and how many people can stick around for it, we can survey then. If it turns out we're going to lose half the board if we go beyond 6 p.m., then we just keep it to those 3 hours. So that's, I would prefer to do that. You are correct that in terms of, I haven't checked the date. When is our next governance committee meeting? Because that, you know, that's going to be a piece, of how do we plan this after tonight and bring back a formalized plan that Ms. Hines is talking about before the 24th. I know we can get it done. It just might be that we have to look at the governance meeting schedule to make sure that it's the 16th. So, you know, we might, as a governance committee, as chair, I can work with our clerk of the board to flesh out some of the ideas. I can email the governance committee members and say, here's some of the suggestions that were offered to us, and then be prepared that we have something by the 16th pretty much planned out, because it's going to take planning beyond that.
Why not just empower the governance committee to fill the 3 to 6 timeframe? That you guys, that's what you can do.
No, we
And
are, but
I don't
what I
think
worry
you
about
have
is
to
if
come
we-
back to us
Yeah.
to have us say, oh, well, we like that part and not that part. We can empower you to put forth something, and I mean, you guys are 4 really smart people that can do that.
Before we vote on this, yes, sorry, Ms. Evans.
So I support freeing up the Saturday. I support keeping the Friday on the calendar as it's been there for quite some months, and I'm sure we'd have conflicts with other Fridays at this point if we tried to change the Friday. I can support doing some kind of a community service together. I think that's a nice idea. And I think having dinner together with a facilitated conversation would be a good idea as well. I think that we need, what I would suggest is that we give governance a window. Because for one thing, when we talk about community service, I don't think we know what sort of thing we might want to do, and that may make a difference. I mean, it may end up only being 1 hour. It may end up starting at 3. It may end up starting at a different time. It may end up starting at 4:30. So I don't think that we want to tonight limit ourselves to a particular time frame. I think if we ask governance to look at this window, this sort of 3 to 8 window, and find 3 to 4 hours in there to do all of it, and then bring that back to us. I like the idea of a facilitated conversation as long as we have kind of a roadmap for what we want to do, as opposed to just being kind of free-flowing. I think we need to have some sort of a roadmap of where we want to go with that conversation.
So our clerk of the board did reach out to Karen Cleveland just to check and see did she have availability on her calendar for that Friday, February 24th, in the event that the board decided we would like to break bread and have a facilitated conversation, and she is available. know if there's any cost with that. We wanted to first find out before we went any further down the road with her on how the board, did you want to meet it all in February? And if so, in what manner? Ms. Evans, I think taking your input, I am worried when you have a committee that only meets once a month. And we are now pretty much a month away from
Right.
February
That's
24th.
true.
I'm not necessarily comfortable going back one more time to have governance decide, do we do a community service project or do we do a breaking bread and facilitated conversation? You bring up a point that echoes what Ms. Hines said, which is, okay, can we find a community service project and will it be centrally located? And then is it something that the board members felt like that was, helping us in our board relations? It would be my personal recommendation that the suggestion of a team building community service thing be something we build into the July retreat, and that this one be just a 3 hours breaking bread, team building. We're about to embark on two very important
I would be fine.
actions
I would
together.
be fine with that as well, just because I think having exactly the right timing and the right event might be difficult
I
to
don't know
find.
that we have
But I
time.
also think that we could empower you as governance chair to work with the clerk of the board to if we gave you this time frame, you could figure out what people's calendars were.
True, I understand that, but I do think in light of the timing and it being a month away and everything that's on people's schedule, we've got the budget vote coming up and
So are you
everything else.
suggesting we just
I think we
do
stick to
like
February
5
24th,
5 to 8
three to six.
or 3 to keep it at, you're suggesting 3 to 6? Keep it at 3 to 6? So
No, so
and that would include just dinner and a facilitated conversation?
So as governance chair, what I would like right now, on behalf of the committees, let's just take a vote where people are. And I was going to put out the different options to say, okay, number one, I'm going to make this easy. Everybody raise your hand, we're dropping Saturday off. Okay, there you go. Number one. Number two, given the time frame that the board has to make a decision, I would like you to vote one way or the other. Do you want to vote for 3 to 6 with a facilitated discussion and shared meal of some kind? The other option is going to be that the governance chair will work with the committee and the clerk of the board to identify perhaps a community service activity that also then would still bring us back to the Gatehouse Cafe to just have some shared conversation, but we wouldn't have a facilitator and add that all in. So it's kind of one or the other right now, given the short window of time, 1 month. So raise your hand if you support a facilitated conversation and a sharing of a meal together in that 3 to 6 timeframe window.
Does it have to be 3 to 6?
We could tweak it based on if an email goes out to the board members saying, do you prefer 4 to 7? But I just think, I'm just trying to be fair that what's on the calendar now. If we shift it by an hour, we can certainly do that. But I want to say in that 3-hour window that we asked board members to close off their list, show support for that. Okay, right, with a facilitated conversation. Okay. And then, yeah. And then what I will say is, I have one more vote. Would we show hands of support that the governance committee, because we're going to keep working on the July retreat, that you would like for us to look for a community service activity during a July retreat where we are doing team building together? Okay, so I have the will of the board on that one today. Okay, then I think that one is gone. It's done.
Make one suggestion. If we do 3 to 6, since that's a relatively early hours, that the bread doesn't have to be exotic or humongous, because
Correct.
I intend to have another dinner afterwards.
Well, and I mean, I do appreciate what
Potluck,
you're saying,
Mr.
Mr. Moon. If it does turn out to be 3 to 6, then obviously it would be sort of a pre-dinner wine, cheese and crackers type thing. If it turns out that the board says it would be nice to have a meal together and 4 to 7 helps those who are working, I mean, we might hear from those working saying 4 to 7 is better than 3 to 6. I'm so open to that, and we'll send that out through the EAAs to get the. All right, so here's the bad news. It's 8:50. We still have to go into closed session. And I do want to give you an update on the corporate sponsorship policy. Just an update. But we did want to get some philosophical input from the board. So the question I have is, Madam Chair, how long are we expecting the closed session to run tonight?
Ms. Hines?
We have 2 issues to discuss relative to the audit committee. I think that would take at least an hour, knowing this board.
Okay. All right, so my suggestion.
Madam Governance Chair, I don't think you can do yours within 10 minutes, philosophical discussion.
No. So thank you, Mr. Moon. I know I'm looking at this and going, let me just lay it out this way, Madam Chair and Vice Chair of the board. This corporate sponsorship policy, we are doing what I think is very valuable, very thoughtful work on it. But we do need to get some board input based on the information that has come to the governance committee that will really steer the work on this policy. So my request is our Monday work session, we are going from 8:30, I believe, and it says till 4 o'clock. Is there something after 4 o'clock?
Madam Clerk, did we have, what's the last thing on the agenda on Monday? Oh, the
2:30 to
CIP.
4. But we're ending at 4 o'clock. So would it be possible to
Well,
do a governance?
Technically, we're ending at 4 o'clock. I would not count on
I
that,
understand, but what I'm asking is, could
Are
we
you
do?
asking for time?
I'm asking for a governance update added in at 4 o'clock, whether that becomes 4:30 or not.
And
But
is that, you're thinking it will take about an hour?
I think we could do it within an hour. Yeah, because we're not asking you to vote on anything. We're asking for some guidance
Guidance on
as
it?
that we continue to work on it, because there's some things that how we approach this policy, there has been some input that we've gotten, like from the Park Authority and their new policy on corporate sponsorship and naming rights, and what, where our board is in terms of our work on this.
Well, here's what I would suggest on this, that we tentatively put that on for Monday at the end of the meeting, but I think we need to understand that at that point, board members really may be exhausted. We will have had 4 hours discussing the budget. We will have had a couple of hours talking about the CIP. We have several other issues.
Well,
So if we don't, I think we have to be prepared. Now, maybe we'll go lickety-split through all of those.
Could I ask, I'm sorry?
Yes.
Could this be a conversation that you two take offline?
Oh,
Could we-
sure.
Could we trust the chair and the chair of governance to make
Just to
this
schedule it
decision?
another time. Sure.
Okay, great.
As soon
Thank
as
you.
possible.
Just in the
I
interest
agree.
of time tonight, so.
I'm fine with that. If we that I'll visit with the chair on if it's feasible to do it on Monday. If it turns out Monday we don't. But I guess what I would say, Ms. Hines, is because of public notice, if we could just at least tentatively put it on 4 o'clock on Monday, and then I leave it to the discretion of the chair that if our work session runs late, it will have to be postponed to the next convenient time.
Madam Chair, I would support that.
All right,
you know,
that's
for
fine.
public notice.
We can do that. And Madam Clerk, did you hear the resolution there? We're going to put that on at the end of the day. I think that would end up being 4:30 perhaps, and with the understanding that we may just not get to it.
All right, well, then with that, the governance committee portion of this work session is concluded.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. And therefore, I will read the motion to convene a closed meeting. The board will now make a motion to go into closed meeting to discuss and consider personnel matters pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A1 and 2, to consult with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel regarding personnel matters pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A7. Do I see a motion? Moved by Ms. Hines, seconded by Ms. Palchek. All those in favor? Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you are in favor. That's unanimous. We are in closed session. Thank you.